For those of you who are just now joining us on YouTube, Shabbat Shalom and welcome. And we will go ahead and get started. So this has been a very interesting a week for receiving a message, because I was given the message, had it not confirmed, and went ahead and forgot it. Which I often do that until I receive the confirmation, and I'm like, oh wait, that's a confirmation for the message. But this one's kind of interesting because for a long time I was under the impression that I had not received a message, and I was starting to get concerned, wondering if maybe my behavior was out of order or some other thing was going on. At any rate, I got a huge confirmations for the message last night, but then this morning when I woke up, God told me to do something that he doesn't normally have me do. And what he had me do was he had me go and actually study out a word before I started, which I've never really had him do that before. I understand now why, and it makes sense to me. So let's talk a minute about the what we call Shoah. Now, I'm really not supposed to mention Shoah, but I think in this case, as an object lesson, I think it's okay. Shoah is the Hebrew word for Holocaust. And for those who believe that the Holocaust existed and accept the testimony of the Jews, there is a very significant thing that occurred during that time that we should probably bear mention of. Something that could be very, very important to the process of our discussion. And it is this: when the ghettos were closed, when all of the different areas where the Jews were living were shut down, and people were not given an opportunity to live there anymore, and they were put onto trains, and they were taken to death camps, and they were taken to concentration camps. When a rabbi was made aware that he was going to be taken, he would go into the synagogue and he would put his hands up like this, and his disciples would take the Torah scroll and wrap it around his body and then remove it from the wooden scrolls, okay? And so there were two very important elements to that. The first is that he would then put his clothes back on, and they would be taken to the train. There's a turn that occurs. So when you're traveling a certain direction, and then there's this turn, and as they would make this turn, they would see the smoke from Auschwitz, and they would know that they were going to die. Well, it is forbidden to cause the name of God to be taken of no account. And in in Jewish understanding, that equates to not erasing the name, nor defacing the name, nor burning the name, okay? And so what they would do is they'd see that they were going to Auschwitz. Everybody knew that Auschwitz was a death camp. And so they would remove their clothes, take the Torah scroll off the rabbi, roll it up, and there was these little tiny windows about that big that they would have for air intake into the trains, and they would roll that up and they would throw it out the window because they knew that they were going to die. And so a rabbi would be wrapped in the Word of God. Now, it's interesting because in modern times, we don't have the luxury of we don't have the luxury of sitting down and actually reading from a scroll and actually taking the time to see what the Hebrew says. We have the luxury of a book, a codex, if you will, which is a compilation of pages that is bound in such a way that you can turn to them and not have to roll the scroll. I said luxury because unfortunately what we have instead is we have the burden of understanding the truth of the pages that have been translated into English that are easily accessible. So I can turn my Bible to Exodus, even though that the scroll right now, Exodus, is buried in that fat part. I can't get to it. Can't move to it. And so we have the luxury of going and looking things up, and we have the luxury of having hindsight. But just for today, I'm hoping to really kind of lay down a foundation of nomadic understanding of words, okay? Like I said, when I first started this, I was like, man, why are you having me? I really kind of thought I might be out of order or out of line. But then when I saw what he was doing, I understand it better now. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what a wall represents in Hebrew thought. So whether you have a stone wall or you have a built up dirt mound wall, or you have a cloth or textile wall like canvas or the like, a wall creates a boundary point. A wall creates a line that has to be circumvented to get across. Okay. Now, the reason why this is important is because when we talk about a wall in terms of a nomadic lifestyle, what I want you to think about is that the nomadic peoples had the ability to pack up and leave within a 2 hours time and be gone, and there'd be no evidence necessarily that they were even there. And so a wall to a nomadic Hebrew like Abraham is a canvas separation from the outside and inside of his tent. Now, we've spoken in great length about the inside of the tent being provision, protection, and instruction, the outside of the tent being nakedness, exposure, and dryness. And we've also talked about the path, the prescribed path of going outside the tent to plant crops, tend to animals, and go to war. But we haven't talked a whole lot about the tent wall that continues. And we're going to get to this today. We're going to get into this today. We're going to talk about this tent wall that continues. And so a few things that are important. The first one is that let's just go ahead and let's diagram this actually on the whiteboard. So what we have here, let's go ahead and do this one green. Oh, it is in green. Good. What we have here is a series of rectangular tents. Okay. And they're set up in such a way that they are actually a group of tents like this. Okay. Now there's a back piece of the tent that extends, and actually let's do that in a different color. Let's do that in a darker green. There's a back piece, wrong pen. It's a back piece that extends here. Okay. Let's do just one more tent here. Yeah, I'm thinking that is how we're going to do that. Now, I think it's important to know that this is not necessarily completely accurate, but it's just for illustration purposes. But this is kind of what we got going on here. And this, of course, let's do red for this. This is the clan. Okay. And what they would do is they would position watchmen outside here. Okay. And sometimes the watchmen, so sometimes what would happen is the watchmen would have these awnings that would come out so that they could be shielded from the sun. These awnings come out the backside of the tent. And oftentimes traders would come and sit under these awnings and trade with the clan. But generally speaking, the watchmen would stand under these and they would watch in their directions. Okay. Each one having their angle of watching. Okay. Now there is a let's see, I want this to be a thick line, so I'm going to use my finger. I'll do it in purple because that will associate with this, but there is this continuous line around the whole area, and that basically, that continuous line then becomes the what we call the continuous wall or continuous boundary. And so there was watchmen positioned here as well at the gate. Okay. Now a gate is just an opening in the tent area where things can come in and things can go out. There's no actual door or flap there. Okay. So that's kind of how the nomadic peoples did their thing. Now, I will tell you that the nomadic tribes actually had octagonal tents, but like I said, this is just for illustration purposes. Now, so we have basically the chet. Let's see, I don't want to do this. Let's do this way. We have the chet, which represented a tent wall. And we have the seed sprout or the noon. And this is pronounced chan. Or some people spell it like this. just so you know, to add that extra H in there. So it's not Han, it's Khan, Khan, okay? All right, and so that is, let's see, let's label it this way. Wall continues. Now, why does the wall continue? Because it's all one piece made up of all the parts, right? This purple line represents the wall of the clan, okay? And a boundary line, and what is inside the clan versus outside the clan. What is inside the camp versus outside the camp, okay? Now, a couple things that are important. The first one is that the watchmen are trained assassins. They're trained killers. And the reason they're trained assassins is because they need to think like an assassin. So they were always hired to be trained assassins or killers to be able to think like somebody who would want to break into this purple line. Okay, because obviously you take a sharp sword and cut through canvas and you can step through the back. And all these different movies that you see where they have this tent wall facing some wilderness area and somebody comes in and cuts through the back and kidnaps the lady or whatever, that's not a reality. That's not how it works. Okay, so basically the watchmen are watching to make sure that nobody can cut through and attack this Khan, this continuous wall, this Khan. Now in modern Hebrew, let's see, I think we're going to go with blue. In modern Hebrew, that is the chet and the final noon. Okay, and so the ancient pictographic Hebrew root, this is the ancient pictographic root, actually is the concept of a wall continues. Now, the way that that works is basically along the lines of whoever is in this area is safe. Safe. Okay? Safe. Safety is presented by the forming of the camp utilizing the tent walls. Okay. So now we're going to talk a minute about the tent wall in terms of an individual tent. Okay, so we've got our tent, right? And obviously this is not a rectangular or the true nomadic tent, but this is for illustration purposes only. We have 4 walls. One of them is called a wall door, which means that it will move back and forth, allowing you in and out. But the principle is that the tent wall is actually a separator or boundary creator, okay? But the premise is that it is also something that surrounds. And so for the sake of argument, I'm actually going to give an example of a normal nomadic tent floor plan, which is going to kind of be like this. So that's a floor plan, right? So that's a flat looking down from the top. I'm going to put a few dotted lines here to represent things. For example, we're going to go ahead and represent our, maybe we should, I'm going to go ahead and dot. So there are these guy lines going out from a hole in the middle out to the different corners of the octagon. And at each corner, there is a pole. And so these walls were flat. And so in this sense, it kind of looked like this, basically. You're looking at a side view. Okay. And so you can see where this sentiment is going to be coming from. But what I want to show you is this right here. So this is the drawing of a basket. And actually, you know what? Let's stay consistent here. This is the drawing of a basket. And this is basically like a top view of a basket in the sense that, actually, let's see. Let's do it this way. Let's draw on that. Okay. And basically it has these splines coming down, and then the basket was weaved into those splines, and those splines formed an X. Okay. So basically that's the simple drawing of it or whatever. Okay. But generally speaking, this has a tendency to be like surround. Let's do it a different way. Let's say this has a tendency to be round. Okay, round. Okay. And then, of course, the representation of the Hebrew pictograph for the letter Bet, which is the drawing of a house, is represented like that. And so the sense or the understanding is that there's an inner part to the tent and an outer part to the tent, which is kind of a gender related connection. But the principle is that basically this is going to be tent or family. Okay. All right. Now, the principle here is pronounced in the ancient Hebrew, it's going to be bath, bath. And it means surround. Okay. And in the modern Hebrew, let's see, let's move this. Well, not that whole thing. Let's move this up a little to represent the tent. But in the modern Hebrew, we actually have the Bet, tet. And in modern Hebrew, it would be pronounced bat, right? bat. This is not to be confused with beit tav, which would be bath, which would be daughter. Okay. This is bat, and it means to surround. Okay. But then, so you can see where they use the tent and the roundness of the basket to demonstrate walls surrounding a person. Well, interestingly enough, this ancient pictographic word actually means refuge. Okay. All right. Now, here's the journey. The principle is that when you were in the clan, you were safe because the watchmen were watching the line, right? They're watching this outside part here. I think we need one more watchman in here. His line of sight. Okay, so as you can see, the safety came from the wall because there was somebody there to defend the wall. Okay, all right. Recall that I said that the rabbis would surround themselves with the Torah. We're going to get to that. But the first thing I need to do is add some Hebrew letters to our words. And you know what? Just to be consistent here, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this. We'll get back to that, but I need to move this some more. In fact, I think what I'm going to do, shrink that down and move it up here, because that's just our little demo. And we're going to do, we're going to do bait. And then we're going to do tet. Okay. And now what we're going to do is we're going to add, so let's see, we got to get rid of this. Got to get rid of this final noon. And we need to make a regular noon. And then we're going to add that right there. And on this side, we're going to add this right here. Okay. So this is now pronounced ba. This is now pronounced non. Okay. All right. So the way that this works is basically what we have going on is this principle of the chet. In fact, I'm going to put green boxes. We'll put green boxes around the operative words that we need to have here. So this is going to be chet, and this is going to be chet. And the way I want you to think about it is separates. In fact, let me go ahead and write separates in the green next to the squares. Separates. Okay. And separates. Now, just real briefly, let me give you an explanation about why the Father had me study out a word right before services. So here is the deal. This right here this parent root. And then you know what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll mark the parent roots in a purple square. Okay, so the parent root here and the parent root here. All right, so we mark this in the purple square to represent the parent roots. In fact, we'll go ahead and mark in purple parent root. That's not purple. Parent root. And this is the parent root. Okay, there's a few reasons why this is important, because in ancient pictographic Hebrew, when anthropologists and archaeologists went into the land of Israel and began excavating these places, they started finding these pottery shards that had these drawings on them, but they were in pairs. They were in pairs, not in triplets. Well, modern Hebrew is based upon a lexical root. So let's go ahead and mark the lexical root, because that's going to become important as well. So we'll go ahead and draw that, marking the lexical root, and you'll see why that's going to be important here in a moment. But we'll go ahead and label this as well. This is the lexical. Okay, that's not going to work. Have to write too small for this board. We'll write it up here. Lexical. Okay, and then we'll write it here. Lexical root. Lexical root has 3 letters in it. Well, you'll notice if we were to go with our criteria for child roots, Hanan foots the bill for a child root. Why? Because it has a doubled last letter. This is noon, final noon. Okay, so in or noon is our last letter. But with our other word, batak, we don't get that. We don't get that luxury. Batak is an adopted root, and so the father says, "Go look up the word batak in the lexicon and find the parent root." I was like, okay, I'll go find the parent root. Then I found that I can't find the parent root because why? It's an adopted root, which means I had to go through. And as you know from previous studies, anybody who has watched us of recent, you would know that in order to find that, I had to check this one, I had to check this one, and I also had to check this one in order to find that root. And of course, that's when I found this. The other 2 don't have a significant meaning that would match the original word, and I will show you why here in a minute. Okay, so the reason why this is important is because, here's the drum roll, please, as it were. This word, Hanan, means grace. And this word, batach, means trust. So let's talk a minute about what we have going on here. First of all, grace is and has nothing to do with favor, but instead has to do with the safety of the clan. Okay? The safety of the clan. Furthermore, trust doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the willingness to allow someone to operate in your life and allow them to have you be vulnerable around them as much as it means refuge. You see, the wilderness was a very treacherous place. It had many predators, and the greatest of those was human beings. There were those who dwelt in the desert in caves who basically thrived off of robbery, rape, and murder, pillaging these clans. That's why the watchmen are trained assassins, is because their job is to make sure that no one penetrates the continuous wall. The clan itself exists as a result of a sum of all its parts, in the sense of each tent is connected to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. So they conform one continuous wall represented by the purple. And those who dwell inside are safe because there's a visual boundary in front of, or surrounding them. Remember this word, surrounding them. But also there is a function of safety, because that wall needs to be defended by the watchmen, who are trained assassins. They're trained to kill, so they think like a killer. That way they know how to prevent a killer from going inside. Okay? So these watchmen were policing this outer area, this blue line in this outer area. So the concept is that the parent root grace, which is pronounced Hanan, is actually the continuous wall continues. So grace is the act of preserving the clan. Okay? Has nothing to do with favor. Grace is the act of preserving the clan. Now, on the other side, with trust, trust is the act of taking refuge in the clan. Okay? Why? Because of this bad boy right here. Remember, it means surround until you put the tent wall in the word. B'tzach means trust, but it's trust in the sense of taking refuge. What's the relevance here? The relevance is that when you are dealing with trust, what you have going on is the principle of having to hide and position yourself in the clan. That's the key. Notice it's not just one family. Here's some intrigue for you. Let's say family X doesn't like family Y. That information is extraordinarily irrelevant to the clan. Let's say family M doesn't agree with family N on some points. That information is irrelevant because they all are safe in the clan. What's interesting about this is that in ancient nomadic understanding, that is the concept of removing your ego from the greater purpose. What do I mean by that? If any one of those tents decides that they are going to go to battle or war against anyone else in the clan, the wall breaks. Okay? Now, the relevance of that is going to come in the form of an understanding that in order to dwell in the clan, your understanding of safety could not be conditional. This is where we unfortunately get into the confusion. The word grace does not mean favor, but it does mean unmerited safety. Why? Because there was one simple process: maintain the wall. That's it. Maintain the wall. Ezekiel chapter 22, at the end of the chapter, Yahweh says, I looked to and fro for someone who would stand in the gap and rebuild the wall, and I found none. Therefore, I will destroy this place. If there was a willingness to maintain the wall, then there's a willingness to abide in the clan. Okay? Now, let's say that we do have a conflict arise. What is the filter if a conflict arises? The filter is the clan. The filter is the wall. Without the wall, there is no safety. Without safety, each individual tent fends for itself. So when we are gaining an understanding of this ancient pictographic practice, there's one other element that we need to factor into this process. And that is the factor of the clan leader. You see, in order for the clan to have formed, there has to have been an establishing of greater and lesser. And in order for the clan to have formed, there had to have been some understanding of why somebody was choosing to dwell in safety. Remember what it says in Proverbs: do not pick on your neighbor, for he dwells near you for safety. That is not your neighbor in suburbia. That's the other tent. That's the other tent. That's the other family. That's the other person who is part of the wall. Okay? Now, the reason why this is relevant is because we're going to go further with this and continue to kind of engineer this as we go. Instead of reverse engineering like we always do, we're going to work our way back to something. But the premise and the principle then falls into place that the understanding of trust was that the clan was going to maintain the wall, but that the clan leader was going to maintain order. Okay? trusting in the clan leader to maintain the clan. It is a westernized, foreign to the nomadic lifestyle thought process of democracy. What do I mean by that? I mean that the clan leader is sovereign. What he says goes. And if you do not abide by the clan leader's instruction, then you cannot dwell in safety. Therefore, this purple line represents something. This purple line, which I will highlight in red, this purple line here represents the clan leader's authority of instruction. His instruction is to maintain the boundary or keep the boundary safe. Who's his instruction to? The watchmen, the trained assassins who are professionals in death. Okay? Trained assassins who are professionals in death, they are able to understand death in a very logistical way. So the instruction to the clan itself is to maintain the boundary, maintain the wall, right? The instruction to the assassins is to protect the wall. What does that mean? That means that there would be both those who dwell, and by dwelling, they create the wall. So there's two words we're going to work with here. The first is to dwell. Okay. The second is to guard or shomer. We're going to do the Hebrew word shomer. Okay. Or keep. Okay. All righty. Now, some people may argue, why does the clan leader get to decide whether someone is allowed to dwell in safety or not? Well, it's really simple. If someone is out of order in the camp or in the clan, then they are going to disrupt the wall. They're going to cause the wall to not be as strong. Why? Because they just might leave. So as a result of that, there is a discipline if you are operating in such a way that you would need to be out here, okay? That discipline will come in the form of expulsion. Expulsion from the clan. Why? Because if you do not maintain order in the clan, and one was to rise up against another, then the wall would be broken, the safety would be broken, the clan would no longer be safe, and therefore no longer trustworthy. Okay? No longer trustworthy. And as a result of that, what happens as that undermining occurs, the wall is broken. Okay. So we have two words. We have shachan. Okay. We have shachan, which is going to be shachan like that. Actually, let's do ch. Shachan and shomer. We're going to get into Shechan and Shomer in a minute, but the principle is that you understand that trust is not a cognition. Let me repeat that. Trust is not a cognition. Trust is not an opinion. Trust is an action of dwelling in the camp. I want to prove it to you here in a minute, okay? Guarding is not understood by those who are guarding it to be that of standing by and waiting for something bad to happen. But guarding is an active pursuit of the enemy. I'm going to explain that in a minute. Remember, our watchmen are trained assassins, and so they are in a constant state of thinking about death. They're in a constant state of thinking about how a marauder could come at the camp. They plan for it. And sometimes they go out to war to prevent the war from coming to the camp. Okay, so we have guard and we have dwell. We're gonna get into this now. So on the first part, what we need to do is take a look at a verse, and that verse is actually in Proverbs 37. I'm sorry, not Proverbs 37, Psalm 37. Psalm 37, verse 3. Psalm 37, verse 3. And let's do this. Let's go to the NASB 2.0. And let's take a look at this. Trust in Yahweh and do good. Live in the land and cultivate faithfulness. Let's take a look at what that says in the Hebrew. So we have betach. There's our Hebrew word betach. Betach ba Yahweh, which would be in Yahweh. Okay. So in this way, the way that I want you to think about this is that this is not trust in, like investing your trust in, but instead dwelling in the clan. Okay. And it furthermore goes on to say, Shechan Aretz, dwell in the land. Dwell in the land, right? And so there's our word Shechan. That means to dwell or settle down, okay? And it is basically, it's a cognate with the lexical root shechav, which means to lie down. So laying down in the tent, laying down in the tent with your spouse, laying down in the tent to rest, like on Shabbat, laying down in the tent when you are sick. Shechan means to abide and dwell in the tent. And what I want you to think about is when you're in the tent, you are in provision, protection, and instruction. Where does that provision, protection, and instruction come from? The Father, which is what? The word of, which means strength of the tent. It's that middle pole holding up the whole tent. So as you dwell in the surrounding of this separation, this boundary that keeps you from nakedness, shame, dryness, and exposure, you are having to believe that the Av or the Abba gives and brings provision, protection, and instruction, which is a cognition of trust, but is not trust. In Hebrew, batach, trust, is not what you think or the opinion that you have about the provider, protector, and instructor, but instead actually dwelling in his tent. Actually dwelling in the clan for safety. So where grace is the action of creating a refuge, trust is the action of dwelling in that refuge. Okay? We're gonna look at this in a certain manner. Let's go ahead and take a look at the whiteboard again. New page. And we're just going to kind of create our circle again. Okay. So there's our camp. Okay. And so inside is grace. Now, when you are inside the camp, you are, and let me put a parenthetical statement here that when you are inside the camp, you are dwelling, Shakan. And you see in our psalm that we see in our psalm the Hebrew word shakan, and we can see that we are actually, I'm going to go ahead and put that Hebrew word up here. Apologize for my atrocious Hebrew. You see that word shakan is already present in the process of Proverbs or Psalm 37, which is what? Trust in Yahweh and do good. We're going to get to that. And then what's the other one? Trust in Yahweh and do good. Dwell in the land and feed off his faithfulness. Okay, dwell in the land and feed off his faithfulness, or dwell in the land and cultivate his faithfulness. Well, let's see. I think probably Young's literal on this one is the best translation to see how the Hebrew reads. Trust in Jehovah, of course that's Yahweh, and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy faithfulness. Enjoy faithfulness, okay? So the principle is that in order to be functional in this, you have to abide. Okay. So out here is not abiding. Never do I get that opportunity for this I to just be a dot. Abide. Not abiding. And this is abiding. Okay. So the principle is that when you are within the clan, you are in a state of shechan. Now, there's only one reason that you can legitimately be outside the camp and not be here, and that is if you are watching which is our Hebrew word keep, our English word keep, and our Hebrew word shomer. Okay. Shomer. And that is Sheen Mim Fresh. Okay, Shamar. All right. So, and actually I need to, instead of this being Shomer, it needs to be Shamar. The act of policing or the act of keeping is going to be Shamar. Okay. All right. So now the way that I want you to think about this is by staying, let's do this in blue, by staying in here, this is an act of trust. By staying within the boundary, that is an act of trust. Okay? Staying outside the boundary is an act of not trusting. Okay? Not trusting. And you see how this is falling together as a nomadic lifestyle, because what we have in front of us is the concept of the tent wall. Whether the tent wall is continuing or whether the tent wall is surrounding and providing that boundary of safety. So I'm sure some of you by now are probably in your minds going, well, wait a minute. Isn't a boundary a commandment? Recall earlier that I said that the purple line highlighted by the red squiggly line is actually what? It is the instruction of the clan leader being obeyed. By keeping order, he maintains the wall. In order to maintain the wall and in order to keep order, he has to give instruction. Okay? So then the boundary, which I think I'm going to change the color of to purple, since it is sovereign, the boundary is instruction. In the Hebrew, that word is Torah. Or in the English translated as law. And so abiding in the boundary is actually, see what color I want to do here. This one, I think. Abiding in the boundary is actually obedience. So the action of dwelling in the surrounding walls of grace, the surrounding walls of the clan, the continuous wall is obedience. So obedience is actually the act of trust. Now, the principle is that the reason why you choose not to trust is because of oh goodness, we gotta go get a better E here. Rebellion. And rebellion is the result of what? Rebellion is the result of a hardened heart. As a result of what? As a result of bitterness. As of hurts. Okay. So what's interesting is that you cannot trust and have a rebellious heart at the same time. Let me repeat that. You cannot trust and be rebellious at the same time. So this week's parasha has a very interesting connection to our discussion. Now I'm going to just switch this over to the Westminster Leningrad Codex. And we are going to go over to our parasha. Remember and recall that a parasha is actually a section of Torah, and I will point that out in a moment. But this word right here, the etchanan, is what we are wanting to look at. So let's go look at it. And what I'll do is we'll go ahead and do the forward inline on this. Actually, let's do the reverse inline. And I besought the Lord. Well, no, that's not what that says. The etchanan is actually, as grammar goes, in the hithpa'el, and it is in first person. So we will talk a moment about hithpa'el. In English, we are lacking two very important grammar elements that Hebrew has, but English does not. So therefore, translation is very difficult. But in Hebrew, they have something called the reflexive intensive. The hithpa'el is the reflexive, but it will always be in the intensive. So let me give an example of intensive, okay? Intensive is going to be like the difference between, okay, so standard simple form would be, I broke the pot, okay? But if I smashed the pot in an act of violence, then that's the intensive. Both of them are pronounced, or both of them have the same spelling, shin bet resh, shavar, which means to break. But the smashing of something becomes shavir instead of shavar. Okay, so there's just a sounding difference. The spelling's the same. But when we get into the reflexive, it will always be intensive. So it could never be, so the reflexive is the idea that something is going in on itself, okay? So if it's in the plural, then it would be, we broke ourselves? No, we smashed ourselves. But if you go into the singular, then it is yourself. And so it would be, I smashed myself. Could never say I broke myself. Well, in this case, the Hebrew word here is chanan. Let me show you. See right here where I have it highlighted. There's our Strong's number. There's chanan, to be gracious, to show favor, pity. Okay. But going back, we see that this is in the hithpael. So this is not grace per se in the sense of safety, but in the sense of fleeing to refuge. Okay, that's how I want you to think of it. So the difference between, yeah, we'll get to the walled city by tonight, as opposed to racing towards the walled city as fast as you can because somebody's after you. That would be the difference in the intensive there. But then Moses says, and I graced myself. Okay, I graced myself. That is the et chanan. And in our scroll, here is the parasha break right here. And zooming in, here is the et chanan. The et chanan. Think of our word from a nomadic perspective. What has Moses done here? He has created a refuge for himself, okay, to Yahweh. To Yahweh. The et chanan el Yahweh. To, right there, to Yahweh. Okay. So in that principle, we know that he was banking on the what? On the safety of the sovereign, the safety of the clan leader. But why was he doing this? The reason that he was doing this, if we go into our actual verse in the English, let's do NLT. And it says, at that time, I pleaded with Yahweh and said, well, let's see why that's the case. The reason that is the case is because basically he kind of makes the statement here that they are going to not, he is not going into the promised land. Okay. And he says, "O sovereign Lord, you have only begun to show your greatness, your greatness and strength, and the strength of your hand to me, your servant. Is there any God in heaven or on earth who can't perform such great and mighty deeds as you? Please let me cross the Jordan to see the wonderful land on the other side, the beautiful hill country and the Lebanon mountains." So you see here, he asked Yahweh to go into the promised land by trying to bank on the safety of the clan. Okay. All right. The reason why this is important is that Et Chanan sets the stage for this Torah portion. And the main thing that is discussed in this Torah portion is how Yahweh chose and how he honors, how he protects, and how he deals with his people. And one of the reasons why this is important is because we have been so broken up into disarray that we do not have a clan by which to dwell in, but furthermore, we're out alone, exposed, naked, ashamed, dry. We are not, our lips are not moistened, but we are parched by the heat of the desert. And our bodies are not covered because we have not chosen to dwell in the clan. Who is the clan? What is the clan? The clan is Israel. If you name the name of Messiah, Yeshua, or Yeshua HaMoshiach, then you are of the clan of Israel. And you dwell within that clan because why? Because Yahweh has appointed watchmen to protect Israel and has given a surrounding boundary of protection, his instruction as an opportunity to be obedient to and therefore be blessed. Remember, it is faith that brings the birthright. Believing and abiding in that belief brings the birthright of the children of promise, and therefore we are sons of God. And we cry out, Abba, Father. But if you are going to dwell in that boundary, you have to trust his promises concerning that boundary. If people did not trust the clan leader to protect them, then they would leave the clan. Isn't it intriguing that the boundary that protects the clan is instruction, and by leaving that instruction, you were outside the camp. By leaving that instruction, you demonstrate that you do not trust the clan leader, but also by leaving that boundary, you are demonstrating that you have a hardened heart. Because over and over again, Yahweh indicates that it is a softened heart that is able to be obedient to him. So one of the reasons why this is so important is because then we get into the principle, or we get into the concept of that a lack of obedience to Torah is actually the result of a lack of trust, which is interesting because the lack of trust is the result of fear. You see, in order to demonstrate that you trust the clan leader, you have to stay in the boundary. When you are outside the boundary, you are reacting to fear as a result of a past experience that caused you to have an adverse reaction to a presentation of it possibly happening again. So you say, oh, in the past, I've trusted a clan leader and he did not keep us safe. And since he did not keep us safe, we did not dwell in safety, and we were attacked and we were marauded and I was injured. Therefore, I don't trust this clan leader, and therefore I am going to do what is right in my own eyes. And I'm going to leave the boundary line, and I'm going to fend for myself. So what's intriguing about this is that that will always be accompanied by an intention to get others to rally around you, which brings us back to our theme since Passover, which is what? Lashon hara. In order to get people to rally around you and reject the clan leader, you have to have a rebellious heart. But in order to get people to align with you, you have to speak evil of the clan leader and get people to ally with you. Why? You don't go out there alone. That would be stupid. So you're going to try to get people to build another camp, or you're going to try to get people to reject the clan leader, and therefore now you have allies to protect you from the marauders. What's interesting about all this is there are two types of people. Well, there are three types of people actually involved in this, and which are those who abide in the circle or in the boundary line. There are those who choose not to abide in the boundary line, and there are those who are appointed to be watchmen. Those who are appointed to be watchmen, we need to talk about these watchmen. But one of the more important things that you need to understand about how all this works is you need to think in terms of that it is not your obedience that keeps you in the clan. It's your obedience that demonstrates that you trust the clan leader, and therefore you stay in the clan. So your obedience doesn't get you in the door. Your obedience is a demonstration that you're in the door. Okay? In that same way, your disobedience doesn't get you put outside. Your choice to go outside gets you put outside. And your choice to be outside is demonstrative of disobedience, rebellion, and sedition. Okay. So let's talk about these watchmen. Remember I said they are experts in death. But what I want you to think about is, what does that mean for our process? If guardians of Torah or guardians of the continuous wall or guardians of grace are experts in death, what do you think that means? That means that they are beyond the people who are inside the camp. They have stepped further in that they are trustworthy outside the camp. Because why? Because they know how to die. They know how to die, and therefore they know how to live. They can be trusted outside the camp. Why? Because they're the ones who keep that wall safe. The wall itself keeps the camp safe, but the watchmen keep the wall safe. They are shomer Torah. They are guardians of Torah. The difference between those who are obedient and those who are guardians of Torah has to do with the ability to die to self. You see, a majority of the people who are in the clan are just going to dwell in the land, feed off of the faithfulness of the clan leader, and be obedient to his instructions so they can be in the clan. That means that they're going to do the bare minimum. They're going to look at commandments as a burden. They're going to look at commandments as a requirement that they have to do, and they blindly obey it. But they haven't really mastered brokenness. And they haven't really mastered the concept of suffering. But I want you to hear a very interesting verse. It says if we are, and I'm going to paraphrase it, if we are heirs with Christ, then we should also suffer with him. Now, what's intriguing about that is what suffering would mean to Paul would be having the patience to endure those with weak minds, and therefore maintaining your strong mind. The principle of suffering in Hebrew is something called being long in the nose. It's an idiom. You see, the word wrath itself, or anger, is actually a flaring of the nostrils, off. And it's the idea, the Hebrew word off, A-P-H, off. And the principle is that the nostrils would flare when somebody would become angry, and therefore that's what that represented. So if someone was to be long in the nose, it meant that they would be able to not have their nostrils flare so easily, and therefore have patience. That's the concept of being long in the nose. So when Paul says, if indeed we suffer with him, we have to look to Romans chapter 9, where it says, what if God showed his mercy to the sons of obedience or honor by not pouring his wrath out on the sons of disobedience or dishonor? Meaning what? There's a principle, or there's an idea that God leaves the wicked alone, because if he uproots the wicked, he may uproot the righteous. And we wouldn't want that to happen. And so he has stayed his hand of wrath in order to preserve the righteous. Now, granted, he's also a micromanager in that he deals with the wicked. If you read the rest of Psalm 37, in the beginning, it says, don't worry about evildoers. Trust in the Lord, dwell in the land, and feed off his faith, or trust in the Lord, do good, dwell in the land, and feed off his faithfulness. So the response to the phrase, don't worry about evildoers, is followed by the statement, trust in the Lord. Notice that this abiding, or this trusting, or this obedience does not necessarily reflect opinion. You see, in English thought, you think someone to be trustworthy or not trustworthy. But when you think somebody to be trustworthy in Hebrew thought, you don't, it results in an action. It results in a actual movement, an actual dynamic process. Okay. So in this way, then, when we are thinking about the act of obedience as being trust, we need to start to get our minds and ideas wrapped around those who are trustworthy in our lives, and whether we have demonstrated a rebellious heart or whether we have demonstrated a trusting heart by being obedient to them, even if they're questionable. Because in the end, I'm going to throw some things out there. Now let's look at this a little bit differently. What if we were to put the batak into the hith pa'el, and now there's a reflexive, and we use the third person he? So he entrusted himself to us. What do I mean by that? Well, Remember, Yeshua said, unto the least of these, if you have done it to them, then you have done it to me. Remember, he gave me drink, he gave me food, etc. Well, in order to give those things to Yeshua, you have to trust the process, which means that if you are in a position where you have given, Yahweh entrusted himself to you, made himself take refuge in you. Now, people will be like, wait a minute. Again, trust the process. The poor, Yeshua said we'd always have the poor with us. The poor then are what? They are Yahweh, right? Yeshua says, unto the least of these, you've done it to me, right? The poor are the deficit. They're the hole. They're the empty vessel to pour into. The wealthy are those who have prospered either through wicked gain or through righteous gain, and now have the ability to give to the poor, which means if you have been given something, you have been entrusted with it, Yahweh has put his trust in you, and therefore he has entrusted himself to you. Okay? And so from that perspective, then, if you have children, if you have a management position, if you are a ministerial leader, if you are a teacher, Yahweh has trusted you with those. And I propose to you that he has done that as a result of the fact that you are trustworthy, which is an opinion, but I'm going to put out there that the only way that that could equate to a Hebraic fruit is beyond just having an opinion of you, which means he's going to put you in a position to be trustworthy. And he is going to put himself in a position to trust you. And so from that perspective, then, each time that we step outside of the camp in our disobedience to Torah, we're demonstrating that even though he trusts us, we don't trust him. We don't trust that dynamic. So as a result of that, then we what? Then we form a rebellion. We figure out how to convince others that he is not trustworthy. We will never be silent. We will never quietly not trust God. We will verbally try to convince others not to trust him. If it is a parent, a pastor, a manager, a boss, we will do the same thing. We will find someone else to convince. We will convince someone else that that authority is not trustworthy. And therefore we can rebel against it. So there is a very dangerous process going on here. Why? Because what are the watchmen appointed to do? Keep that which is not supposed to be in the camp outside the camp. That's right. Those who have learned to die to self have the ability to stop the rain for 3 years. Those are the ability to die to self, the ability to call down fire, to open the eyes of a human to see the armies that protect those watchmen. It is very important to understand that those who you have in your midst who are protectors of Torah have the ability to look at your actions outside the camp and determine them to be a threat, and therefore you will be eliminated because they have already mastered death. And does that mean that somebody's going around with a sword cutting people who don't keep Torah or don't honor Torah? No, 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 no. But understand that they are appointed as righteous judges to determine whether you are a threat to the camp or not. And as a result of that, they and their words will be not only a hindrance to your process, but will eventually be a prevention of your process. So you can see how there's an amazing dynamic in the ancient Hebrew culture of the nomads, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs, all were nomadic. Moshe was nomadic. David was nomadic. Yeshua was nomadic. Paul was nomadic. Peter was nomadic. Meaning what? Meaning that this process is a very real thing for the culture that is present in the kingdom of heaven. And this process of there being a place created for refuge and taking refuge is a very real concept. Which means what? That means the Torah is actually a guardian. Okay? And then there are guardians of Torah. It's an interesting process. Looking one more time at our whiteboard, I want you to think about yourself in terms of how you operate in this diagram. We've always perceived grace to be unmerited favor, and we've always set that way to say that God has an unconditional positive regard for us. That's not quite what that word means. In the Greek, charis may kind of lean in that direction, but the word chanan does not. The word chanan means to create a place of refuge. And of course, then the word trust means to dwell in that refuge. And of course, we understand that to be obedience. I want you to think about this in terms of the connection between these two. And what I mean by that is you can't have both. You either have a trusting heart or you have a rebellious heart. You can't compartmentalize your condition. If your heart is hard, you need to be broken. If you become broken, then you become a watchman. If you become a watchman, you guard or shamar Torah, thereby not only trusting, but becoming trustworthy, because the watchman is entrusted with the boundary. So it's not even a concern as to whether the watchman is going to dwell in the camp anymore. He can dwell outside the camp and be trusted to guard the camp. So there's a reciprocation of trust and being trusted. Okay? Okay. So for those of you who are on YouTube, I will say Shabbat Shalom. And then we'll go ahead and end the YouTube stream.